the sage who could not bend. In the land of Veritas, there lived a man known far and wide as Master Petrus. For 30 years, he had served as the kingdom's most respected sage, advising 3 monarchs and penning 14 scrolls on the proper governance of society. His beard was perfectly trimmed, his robes always immaculate, and his opinions never in doubt. Master Petrus had not always been so certain. As a young scholar, he had witnessed the kingdom torn by strife when King Alaric the Uncertain had vacillated between policies, changed directions with each new advisor, and ultimately plunged Veritas into a period of confusion and discord. In those troubled times, young Petrus had made a solemn vow. Should he ever attain a position of influence, he would provide the unwavering guidance the kingdom so desperately needed. A kingdom governed by doubt is a kingdom ungoverned, he had written in his first scroll, which had earned him the attention of the royal court. Master Petrus made his dwelling atop the tallest hill in the capital, so that, as he often explained to visitors, I might see the entire kingdom and understand its workings better than those who dwell in the valleys below. Few noticed that this position also made it difficult for ordinary citizens to reach him without considerable effort, and fewer still suspected that perhaps this was by design, a subtle barrier between the sage and the changing world he sought to guide. Each morning, Master Petrus would rise before dawn, polish the medals awarded to him by the previous kings, and practice the stern expressions he would deploy in the great council meetings. Some days, looking in his mirror, he would catch a fleeting glimpse of uncertainty in his own eyes, a momentary question about whether his fixed positions still served the kingdom best. In these unsettling moments, his hands would tremble slightly, and a voice deep within would whisper, "Perhaps there is merit in reconsidering." But then he would remember the chaos under King Alaric, the suffering, the confusion, the mockery from neighboring kingdoms. His jaw would set, his eyes would harden, and he would forcefully recite his oldest maxims until the doubt faded like a shadow in the light. A sage, he often declared, not only to his visitors but to himself, must never show uncertainty, for in uncertainty lies the seeds of societal collapse. The more frequently he repeated this maxim, the more firmly he believed it. Master Petrus was particularly concerned with the spread of a certain herb in the kingdom. This green plant had been growing wild in the southern provinces for generations, but recently, more citizens had taken to cultivating and consuming it. Some claimed it eased their pains or helped them find peaceful sleep, while others simply enjoyed its effects. This herb, Master Petrus proclaimed in the council and in his scrolls, shall bring ruin upon our kingdom. Those who partake of it will lose all ambition, all moral character, and all respect for tradition. The kingdom's laws forbidding its use must be enforced with the utmost vigor. Yet strangely, though the laws remained on the scrolls, the royal guards rarely arrested anyone for possession of the herb. Even more curiously, the king's own nephew had been seen enjoying it in the palace gardens without consequence. This leniency was not a recent development. Over the past decade, enforcement of the herb prohibition had gradually relaxed, beginning under the previous king and continuing under the current monarch. Village watchmen who once zealously confiscated the herb now turned blind eyes to its use at festivals. Merchants who had once hidden their herb trading now conducted business in open markets, paying informal taxes to local officials who looked the other way. Master Petrus had written increasingly strident scrolls condemning this creeping laxity, but with each passing year, fewer people made the journey up the hill to hear him thunder against the kingdom's moral decline. The gap between the written law and actual practice had grown so wide that many younger citizens believed the herb had always been unofficially permitted. One day, a young scholar named Amara arrived from a distant province. She had studied in many lands and had come to Veritas to learn from its sages. Amara was not merely curious, she was troubled. In her homeland, she had witnessed the suffering caused by harsh enforcement of the herb prohibition. Her own brother had been imprisoned for 3 years merely for possessing a small amount, returning home a broken man, unable to find work or purpose. The contrast between her homeland's strict enforcement and the stories she'd heard of Veritas's more lenient approach had initially filled her with hope. Perhaps here she would find wisdom about a better path forward. Yet she remained genuinely uncertain which approach best served the common good. She had seen how unregulated use of the herb sometimes led to lethargy and distraction in young users, just as Master Petrus warned in his scrolls, but she had also seen how harsh punishments destroyed lives far more thoroughly than the herb itself ever could. Amara had read arguments both for and against prohibition, studied evidence from neighboring kingdoms, and remained caught between competing truths. She had journeyed to Veritas hoping that its famed sages might help her resolve this inner conflict. Upon hearing of Master Petrus's reputation as the kingdom's foremost authority on the subject, she requested an audience, though not without trepidation. His scrolls had struck her as brilliant in parts but troublingly rigid in others. Would he dismiss her questions? Or might he help her find clarity? With her heart pounding beneath her scholar's robes, Amara climbed the winding path to Master Petrus's hilltop dwelling. Rehearsing her questions, determined to show proper respect while still seeking genuine answers. The old sage agreed to see her, always pleased to impress visitors with his wisdom. When Amara arrived, Master Petrus seated himself in his grandest chair, positioned so that the morning light created a halo-like effect around his head, a staging he had perfected over the years. "Welcome, young scholar," he intoned. "What wisdom do you seek from me today?" Amara bowed deeply, struggling to master her nervousness. This moment, facing the kingdom's most renowned sage, was one she had both eagerly anticipated and quietly dreaded. "Master Petrus," Amara began respectfully, "I have read your 14 scrolls and admired your perspectives on many matters. I'm particularly interested in your views on the southern herb and why you believe its prohibition should be strictly enforced." Master Petrus straightened in his chair, pleased by the topic. This was familiar territory, where his oratory had been refined through countless repetitions. "The southern herb," he began, "corrupts the mind and weakens the soul. I have documented 37 cases where those who consumed it developed various maladies of thought. The kingdom that allows such a substance to flourish invites its own destruction." Amara nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your concern. Yet in my travels, I've observed that in the kingdom of Lumina, where they have removed penalties for personal use of the herb while maintaining strong prohibitions against selling it to the young, the rates of consumption have actually declined, and public health has improved." Master Petrus's brow furrowed slightly. The kingdom of Lumina is nothing like Veritas. Their customs and character are entirely different. What works there would bring disaster here. "Perhaps," said Amara, "though the people seem quite similar in temperament and values. But let me ask about another matter. The kingdom spends 20,000 gold pieces each year arresting and imprisoning those who use the herb. Might those resources be better directed elsewhere?" "The cost is irrelevant when the moral fabric of society hangs in the balance," Master Petrus replied, his voice rising slightly. "You are thinking like a merchant, counting coins, when you should be thinking like a sage, counting souls." Amara persisted gently. "I've also noted that the fermented beverages served at royal feasts have caused more documented injuries and deaths than the southern herb. Yet you advocate for their continued availability." At this, Master Petrus's face darkened. "You're employing a common tactic of herb sympathizers. Whenever the herb's dangers are mentioned, they immediately cry, 'But what about fermented drinks?' As if one folly justifies another." "I don't mean to upset you," Amara said calmly. "I'm trying to understand the principle that guides your thinking on these matters." "My principles are consistent and clear," Master Petrus stated firmly. "It is your questioning that is muddled." "One final question, if I may," Amara ventured. "In your third scroll, you wrote that no kingdom can long survive that restricts the natural liberty of its citizens without compelling cause. Does this principle not apply to the prohibition of the herb?" Master Petrus stood abruptly, his patience exhausted. "You twist my words. You take them out of context. That scroll addressed taxation, not moral matters. I see now you didn't come to learn but to argue." As the words left his mouth, a strange sensation washed over him. A memory from his youth, when he himself had questioned his teachers with similar persistence. For a fleeting moment, he saw himself in the young woman before him. Had he once possessed the same earnest curiosity that now irritated him so deeply? The thought unsettled him profoundly. If he acknowledged the validity of her questions, what else might he need to reconsider? No. That way lay the uncertainty he had spent a lifetime avoiding. He hardened his expression. "I came seeking understanding," Amara replied, maintaining her outer composure though her voice quavered slightly. She had not expected such hostility, and despite her determination, she felt a sting of shame at having apparently offended someone she had genuinely hoped to learn from. Yet beneath that shame burned a quiet conviction that her questions deserved answers. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion another time, when—" "There will be no other time," Master Petrus interrupted, his voice rising to mask his inner discomfort. "I have important matters to attend to. I didn't expect to waste an entire morning being interrogated about a single topic when I have wisdom to share on dozens of subjects." As Amara departed down the hill, she fought back tears, not of sadness but of frustration. She had traveled so far, prepared so thoroughly, only to be dismissed without the dialogue she sought. Yet with each step away from the hilltop dwelling, her resolve strengthened. If Master Petrus would not engage with her questions, perhaps others would. Perhaps the answers she sought lay not with those who claimed to possess all wisdom, but with those humble enough to acknowledge the limits of their understanding. Meanwhile, Master Petrus paced in his chamber, his familiar surroundings suddenly feeling strangely confining. "Impertinent girl," he muttered. "She didn't truly read my scrolls. If she had, she would have agreed with me." But a small voice within him whispered, "What if she read them more carefully than anyone else has? What if the flaws she found are real?" He silenced the voice quickly. Doubt was a luxury he could not afford, not after 30 years of certainty, not with his reputation and legacy at stake. Yet as he gazed out his window at the kingdom below, it seemed somehow more distant than before, as if the hill beneath his dwelling had grown imperceptibly taller. Meanwhile, Amara, still shaken by her encounter, stopped at the home of another sage, Master Thelonious, known for his quieter wisdom. The dwelling was humble, nestled among the people rather than above them, its garden wild and vibrant with life. When she described her meeting with Master Petrus, tears of frustration finally escaped. "I studied for months to prepare my questions," she confessed. "Was I disrespectful? Should I have simply nodded and accepted his pronouncements without seeking to understand their foundations?" Thelonious listened attentively, his ancient eyes kind but penetrating. When she had finished, he rose slowly and led her into his garden, where plants of all varieties grew together in seemingly chaotic harmony. "There is an old oak tree here," he told her, pointing to a majestic specimen at the garden's edge. "For 40 years it has stood, growing taller and stronger. Yet last winter, when heavy snows came, its largest branch broke while smaller, more flexible trees survived the storm unharmed." "Master Petrus is the oak branch?" Amara guessed, wiping away her tears. "Master Petrus has many admirable qualities," Thelonious replied, picking up the broken branch from where it lay beneath the tree. "His conviction is genuine, his learning extensive, but wisdom without flexibility becomes brittle. A truly wise tree bends with the wind but does not break." He handed her the branch, still beautiful in its grain and texture, but now severed from life and growth. "But how can one determine when to stand firm and when to bend?" Amara asked, running her fingers along the smooth wood. "I seek truth, not mere popularity. If I am too yielding in my convictions, do I not risk abandoning truth for convenience?" Master Thelonious nodded, pleased by the thoughtfulness of her question. By listening more than speaking, by considering that one might be mistaken, by understanding that the seed of truth can sometimes be found in the questions of others, not just in one's own answers. He gestured toward a willow tree swaying gently by a stream. "Notice how the willow's strength lies not in resisting the wind but in moving with it. The willow does not abandon its nature, it remains firmly rooted, but neither does it pretend to be stronger than the wind." Amara contemplated this, feeling something shift within her understanding. So wisdom is not found in certainty alone, but in the balance between conviction and openness. "You begin to understand," Thelonious smiled. "And remember, even the mighty oak began as a flexible sapling." Word of Amara's encounter with Master Petrus spread throughout the kingdom. Some defended the old sage, praising his unwavering principles. Others began to question whether his inflexibility had prevented the kingdom from finding better approaches to its challenges. As for Master Petrus, he retreated further into his hilltop dwelling, beginning to write a 15th scroll titled "The Danger of Questioning Established Wisdom." Yet as he dipped his quill and prepared the first lines, something unexpected happened. The words would not flow as they once had. He wrote a sentence, then crossed it out. He tried again, then set aside the parchment. He paced his study, troubled by unfamiliar doubts. "Am I writing this scroll to defend wisdom?" he wondered in a rare moment of uncomfortable self-reflection, "or merely to defend myself?" The question disturbed him so deeply that he left the scroll half-finished for days, returning to it only out of stubborn commitment to his self-image as the kingdom's moral voice. When finally completed, the 15th scroll lacked the fire and certainty of his earlier works. Even he could sense it. Few citizens made the journey to read it, and fewer still found in it the clarity they sought. In the solitude of his study, surrounded by his earlier works, Master Petrus was increasingly haunted by questions he could not banish. Late at night, when the kingdom slept, he would sometimes remove his most treasured scroll from its sealed case, his very first work, written when his beard was still black and his purpose clear. Reading his younger self's words, he would occasionally feel a bitter pang, recognizing the passion and genuine concern for the kingdom that had once driven him. "Have I served wisdom, or merely my own reputation?" he would wonder in these dark hours. But with each dawn, he would restore his certainty like a familiar garment, too afraid of what might remain if he discarded it. In time, the council convened to reconsider the kingdom's approach to the southern herb. Master Petrus refused to attend, declaring the debate itself a symptom of moral decay. Without his dominating presence, many voices were heard, including those of physicians, common citizens, and even former offenders. Amara was among those who spoke. No longer the nervous scholar who had climbed the hill, she now stood before the council with quiet confidence, presenting evidence from various kingdoms and suggesting a balanced approach that acknowledged both concerns and realities. When challenged, she did not grow defensive but engaged thoughtfully with the questions, a quality that increasingly drew others to her perspective. The kingdom eventually adopted a new approach, focusing on education and treatment rather than punishment. To everyone's surprise, except perhaps Amara's, the problems associated with the herb neither disappeared completely nor grew worse, but slowly improved as citizens made more informed choices. On the day the new proclamation was issued, Master Petrus stood at his window, watching the gathering in the square below. For a moment, his hand moved toward his writing implements, perhaps to begin a scathing condemnation, perhaps to reconsider his position, but then fell still. The words would not come. From that day forward, Master Petrus grew quieter. When visitors occasionally made the journey to his hilltop dwelling, they would find him still polishing his metals, still speaking with certainty, still wondering aloud why the kingdom no longer sought his counsel. Yet those who looked closely might notice his scrolls gathering dust, or catch him gazing toward the horizon with an expression that, in another man, might have been called regret. And so it came to pass that the sage who could not bend ultimately broke his connection to the very kingdom he had sought to guide, becoming not a beacon of wisdom but a cautionary tale told to young scholars about the dangers of rigid certainty. Years later, when Amara had become a respected sage in her own right, she would sometimes tell this tale to her own students. Those who knew her well noticed that she kept two objects on her simple desk: a piece of the broken oak branch, polished smooth by time and handling, and beside it, a slender willow twig, still flexible after all these years. When asked about these talismans, she would smile and say, "These remind me of the two greatest lessons I have learned. From the oak, I learned that conviction without humility leads to brittleness. From the willow, I learned that flexibility without roots leads to weakness. True wisdom requires both." As for Master Petrus, legends say that in his final years, a young gardener in his employ gradually coaxed him to venture into the gardens surrounding his hilltop dwelling. At first, the old sage would stand stiffly at the garden's edge, observing from a distance as though supervising the gardener's work. "Master," the gardener said one day, "why does this flower grow better in shade, while that one prefers sun?" Petrus began to answer with his usual certainty, then paused. "I do not know," he admitted, the unfamiliar words strange on his tongue. The gardener simply nodded and continued working. The next day, Petrus returned, watching more intently. "What determines which plants thrive together?" he asked, surprising himself with his own curiosity. This small question led to others. Each day, the old sage ventured a little further into the garden, each question leading to another discovery. Among the growing things, beyond the realm of human affairs and rigid doctrines, something in the old sage softened. He wrote no 16th scroll, but those who visited him in his last days reported that he had taken to asking questions rather than pronouncing answers, tentatively at first, then with genuine curiosity. Whether this tale of his transformation is true, none can say with certainty. But to this day in Veritas, when new sages are installed in the council, they receive two symbolic gifts: an oak medallion representing conviction, and a willow ring representing adaptability. Together, these form the emblem of true wisdom. For as Master Thelonious often reminded his students, the oak that cannot bend with the wind may keep its shape, but the willow that bends may keep its place in the forest. Yet the wisest tree knows when to be each.